The Middle East has seen over 200 wars and conflicts since 1945, raising the question, why is this region prone to violence and instability? The answer lies in its history, geography, and politics. As the cradle of civilization and crossroads of empires, the Middle East underwent division by the French, British, and Russians, with borders drawn without regard for language, ethnicity, or identity. Artificial states were created, separating those who belonged together and forcing those who wanted to be apart, sowing seeds of conflict and resentment that persist. It's a ticking time bomb. But when did the US join the game? Mostly after World War II, when the European powers lost influence and the US became the main actor. With interests and duties in the region, the US realized oil was key to global power and influence, leading to a sprawling network of alliances, covert attacks, flows of weapons, money, and construction of numerous bases. Interventions often lacked consideration for consequences or local wishes. The wealth of oil and Western invasion challenged religious authority, creating a new class benefiting from modernization and globalization, but facing issues of inequality and corruption. Western presence brought new ideas like democracy and human rights, but also provoked nationalism and fundamentalism, turning the Middle East into a battleground for ideologies and identities. But how did the US presidents deal with the ongoing challenges? The answer varies depending on the historical context and the personal views of each leader. President Truman saw the region as a battleground of the Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union. He supported the creation of Israel and the containment of communism. President Eisenhower followed a more balanced approach, offering economic and military aid to the Middle Eastern countries that resisted Soviet influence. President Kennedy continued this policy, but also faced the rise of Arab nationalism and the Suez Crisis. A major shift occurred under President Johnson, who openly backed Israel with money and weapons in its wars with its Arab neighbors, who denied its right to exist. This made it difficult for the US to be a neutral mediator, as many Arab states distrusted the US. It also complicated the situation for the US leadership. President Nixon inherited a messy and murky region, where terrorism, oil politics, and OPEC, Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, emerged as new factors. The story gets darker from here. The US involvement in the region had negative consequences for many presidents. Some presidents were ruined by the region. The first one was Jimmy Carter. Carter tried to be a fair broker, and he achieved great success with the Camp David Accords between Egypt and Israel. But the region fell apart soon after. The Iranian Revolution and the hostage crisis destroyed Carter's presidency. President Reagan faced even worse problems. There was a war between Iran and Iraq, which the US supported Iraq in, hoping to curb Iran's power and aggression. The US supplied Iraq with weapons, intelligence, and diplomatic support, even when Iraq used chemical weapons and violated human rights. The US also ignored Iraq's nuclear ambitions. The US hoped that the war would weaken both sides and prevent either of them from dominating the region. In the late 1970s, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, prompting the US, led by President Carter, to support Afghan rebels, including notable figures like Osama bin Laden, who later became associated with Al-Qaeda. President Reagan expanded this support, even referring to the Afghan fighters, among them bin Laden, as our founding fathers. During Reagan's presidency, the Iran-Contra affair scandal erupted. This scandal involved clandestinely selling weapons to Iran and utilizing the proceeds to fund anti-Sandinista rebels in Nicaragua. Although this event wasn't directly tied to Afghanistan, it intricately contributed to the multifaceted landscape of US foreign policy in the Middle East, involving individuals such as bin Laden and groups like Al-Qaeda. President George H.W. Bush had success in the Gulf War, 1990 to 1991, a coalition effort to liberate Kuwait from Iraqi invasion. The military operation, triggered by Iraq's aggressive annexation of Kuwait in 1990, aimed to restore Kuwait's sovereignty and repel Iraqi forces. The coalition, comprising various nations, successfully achieved its immediate goals, securing Kuwait's freedom. However, criticism emerged over the decision not to pursue regime change in Iraq, leaving Saddam Hussein in power. This choice would later be debated, with some viewing it as an unfinished job and questioning its long-term consequences for the region. The situation changed dramatically during President George W. Bush's presidency. The terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001, 9/11, triggered a strong U.S. response, leading to the War on Terror. The U.S. identified an axis of evil, including Iraq, and increased its focus on the region. In 2003, the U.S. led a coalition to invade Iraq, removing Saddam Hussein from power. However, the aftermath of the war was marked by instability, insurgency, and sectarian violence, adding to the overall complexity of the region. The consequences of these events, spanning multiple presidencies, continued to shape the political and social landscape of the Middle East, showing the intricate and lasting impact of U.S. involvement in the region. Barack Obama, during his presidency, withdrew U.S. troops from Iraq in 2011 and from Afghanistan in 2014. Despite these troop withdrawals, he escalated drone strikes and special operations against terrorist groups. Additionally, he played a key role in the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, which aimed to curb Iran's nuclear program in exchange for lifting sanctions. In contrast, Donald Trump, from 2017 to 2021, withdrew the U.S. from the Iran nuclear deal in 2018, imposing sanctions on Iran and triggering a cycle of tensions. He further ordered the 2020 assassination of Iranian general Qasem Soleimani, bringing the two nations to the brink of war. Joe Biden, in office since 2021, re-entered the Paris Climate Agreement, expressed readiness to rejoin the Iran nuclear deal if Iran complies, and halted U.S. support for the Saudi-led war in Yemen. He also initiated a review of U.S. arms sales to Saudi Arabia and the UAE and announced the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan by September 11, 2021, marking the end of the longest war in U.S. history. So the U.S. presence in the Middle East is not only about oil. Oil is becoming less important as we have other sources of energy. The U.S. presence in the region has shaped the foreign policy and the worldview. It has become a part of military and foreign policy strategies, and it is hard to imagine how we could ever leave. Thank you for watching this video. The Middle East is a complex and fascinating region, and this is just a general overview. I want to explore each of these case studies in more detail, because there is so much more to learn from each of these stories. Stay tuned for more videos on geopolitics.